Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Graying Jedi podcast. I am Urza Master. Joining me, as always, we have Lord Uther and Jedi Master Cilium Maz. Gentlemen, welcome back to the Jedi Council chambers, and welcome back to the world of Obi-Wan Kenobi. Part 3 today. And, gentlemen, I don't know if there was any more anticipated meeting of the powers since maybe Randy Savage and Hulk Hogan had their Mega Powers handshake in front of Gene Okerlund. But I don't want to ruin anything. Jedi Master Cilium Maz, take us behind the scenes of Part 3.
Thank you, my fellow Jedi Masters and our Graying Jedi fans. Welcome back to Part 3 of Obi-Wan Kenobi, first aired on June 1st, 2022. Like every episode in this series, directed by Deborah Chow, and like most episodes in this series, some convoluted writing credits. Showrunner Joby Harold and Hannah Friedman get top position. We also have Hossein Amani and Stuart Beatty listed as well, since their earlier drafts as screenplays were then later adapted into this television show. Hannah Friedman's big credit with Lucasfilm was also she worked on the reboot of Willow that they aired also in 2022. So she is a favorite amongst the Lucasfilm crowd. And friends, here's a little Writers Guild tip when you see a lot of names on the writers' credits of your favorite shows and movies, and you want to kind of figure out who did what in terms of it. When you see multiple names joined by an ampersand, that means that those writers work together directly as a team. So in this case, Joby Harold and ampersand Hannah Friedman, they worked together on their drafts, or they were, considered a team for the writing. When you see the physical word and separating writers, so Joby Harold, ampersand Hannah Friedman, and Hossein Amani, and A&D Stuart Beatty, the and suggests a rewrite. That means that those writers work separately in terms of it, but they still get credit for their contributions. So know your difference between the ampersand and the and that should give you a sense. Most times you will see the word and if you see like two names, written by so-and-so, the word and then so-and-so else, the top positioned writer in front of that and is probably the one who's most closely associated with what you're watching. They get top position, which means that they rewrote the person on the other side of that and who gets a second or third position. You can also see that when you see a story by credit, meaning that the people who get the story credit wrote initial drafts of the television show or the movie. And if they show up in the written by or screenplay by or teleplay by, then their contributions, you'll still basically be able to see or be able to experience some of that. But sometimes you'll see different names in the story by credit, meaning that they were completely rewritten by those that got the teleplay or the screenplay. So that's how you figure out writing credits when you're watching it. A good rule of thumb, the less names you see, the more unified the vision probably was, and easier to point the finger if you didn't like what you saw. But in this case, we had 4 credited writers, 1 team, and 2 additionals. We also had Zach Braff, everyone's favorite T-Mobile, I believe. Is it T-Mobile or Verizon? I don't remember which phone company he shills for. I think it's T-Mobile. He was the voice of Freck, the world's worst Uber driver. And why is Obi-Wan always just on these miserable commutes? Like when he was cutting up blubber on Tatooine, and then he had to ride back into Anchorhead with just a bunch of sullen people that wouldn't look at each other, make eye contact. And here he and Baby Leia end up sharing a ride with a bunch of stormtroopers who are asking a bit too many questions, if you ask me. So I just don't know. He always gets stuck with really bad rides. And yet, this was the first episode we finally saw the famous blue lightsaber drawn. Because up until this point, even earlier in the episode, he'd had to use his wits his physical prowess, and a blaster to engage his foes. And this is the first time it's drawn. However, it's a testament to Ewan McGregor and how they're portraying this character as damaged and broken and not the same man he used to be, that just through the conveyance of how he wields his lightsaber, how he conducts himself in the climactic duel, versus the strong, confident strokes we saw in the prequel trilogy of a young Obi-Wan, he's able to convey all of that character and despair and hopelessness just by his body language, his posture, his defensive crouches in this episode. Because, gentlemen, this is the first time we've locked blades since Mustafar. And Mustafar gets a nice early shout out in this episode. One of my favorite Sith planets of all time. Fun fact, if you want to know how Darth Vader ended up getting some real estate and building his own castle, which we've seen in Rogue One, A Star Wars Story, and this episode, go ahead and check out the Marvel Comics run of Darth Vader, their series. It explains what drew him back to Mustafar, the planet where his beloved Padme was grievously wounded and would later go on to die, and when he was maimed by his former master and left for dead. Why would you ever want to go back and revisit that horrible place? Well, the comics do go into that. They talk about a Sith artifact that helps guide him to eventually create this castle, this home away from home. And the shows in the movie just kind of take it for granted. But if you are curious about the backstory, that'd be a good place to start. There would be the Marvel Comics run of Darth Vader. How did Vader get his castle on Mustafar? Gentlemen, from James Earl Jones' triumphant return, there's just so much for this to unpack. I'm anxious to hear your thoughts. If last week's episode running through Osaka and Dayu and rescuing Leia and kind of setting us for the stage, this is the stage we were setting. We have Imperial turncoats, which is always fun. We have, in this case, played by Indira Varma. Again, you might recognize her from HBO's Rome and some other shows. There's just so much there. Tell me, in Chapter 3, did it meet your Force expectations?
Where to start with Part 3? I love the idea of the endless Obi-Wan commute, because think of all the times we see Obi-Wan in the entirety of Star Wars. The first time we see him, he's on basically one long drive and then dies. I mean, every time we see him in Obi-Wan so far, he's on one long drive. Even in the prequels, like, a lot of that is just sort of him waiting to get somewhere on some kind of method of transportation. And then he's always going on about why he hates flying. I get it. It's because all you're freaking doing. Even in The Mandalorian, like, Mando is not always in a ship going somewhere. Like, sometimes he's walking. Sometimes he's just meandering, just sitting in a bar, meeting up with Timothy Olyphant. It's funny. I think the first time I watched this episode, I was very unassuming of where it was about to take me. The subterfuge, the running, the broken Obi-Wan, being confronted with his greatest failure and this massive disturbance in the Force, which stops him like a heart attack when Vader shows up and is just murdering people in the streets trying to draw him out. And then Obi-Wan doing the Jedi thing, right? Putting himself in harm's way to try and save someone, and trying to find a resolution here. Can we talk about the droid?
Oh, I love the droid. Ned.
Yes, Ned, the speechless droid that saves the day. I really want there to be a droid-centric show, because droids in Star Wars are the unsung heroes. And they always have been. From C-3PO and R2-D2 all the way on up to BB-8, R5, all these new droids they're introducing. this is really the untold story of Star Wars that I want them to do next. Granted, I want more Obi-Wan too. Don't get me wrong. Because obviously, as we roll through this episode, we see real dark side. Like, dark side in the dark side way we've always wanted to see. And then it boils over into this revenge, hate, suffering filled moment between these two, Vader and Obi-Wan, where it's just, you knew Obi-Wan really wasn't fighting back, I think. He was kind of laying down because he feels guilty, but he also is trying to buy time. Like, the more time he can buy, the more likely it is Leia gets away. And that's all he really cares about. He's selfless. He's embodying the Jedi code, the Jedi way. And I think the early reception of this, a lot of people are like, why is Obi-Wan such a wiener? Like, he's not fighting back. He's just getting his butt kicked. I get it. I get that point. Obviously, there are, still a lot of episodes to come. But at the time, it's like, I think a lot of people missed the whole point. Is that he knew if he fought back, it might not buy enough time for Leia to escape. That's his objective. He's there to protect her, regardless of what that means for him. It's an old, going back to the prequel trilogy, it's an old Jedi way of fighting only defensively, doing only what is necessary to, make sure that the objective is completed. And that, I think, I don't want to spoil anything coming forward, but I really think that when you start to piece together this full journey, you really see a lot of Qui-Gon in Obi-Wan. And then you see him overcome his master's best parts to incorporate them into his own best self, which is why I think we need a season 2, especially. But there's so much here that happens in this episode that just goes so right that it was unassumingly great for a third episode, because the first 2 episodes are exposition. It's really just setting it up, and this is like your sophomore entry, which I think even in Mandalorian, like, the third episode was kind of it wasn't really, it was good and you were still interested, but it wasn't like you were now grabbed and thrust into something that you maybe were expecting, but not in such magnitude. And I think that's sort of the transit we get in this, is like, you're expecting this to be sort of the sophomore slump, where it's like, they're on a transport, they get to an underground railroad, they're going to get into a ship, there'll probably be a stormtrooper battle, and then they'll get away. Which would have been a perfectly fine vehicle episode. But they totally swerved us for a left, and I loved it.
Yeah, I like the dirty stormtrooper look, where they're not all nice and shiny clean. I did like that. Also gives you almost a sense of, and I talk to my students about this too. Sometimes when, it's easy to invade, but it's tough to hold, and so it might have been easy to invade those planets, but it gets tough to hold because the local population is going to work against you, and soldiers get tired and dirty and sick of being in that place. And that's kind of what that reeked of when he was on that transport with those stormtroopers, where it was almost like the stormtroopers were going, do I really want to get into this? Probably, maybe not, to all of us, it was so obvious that that's the Jedi sitting right there on the transport with you. I also see the fight between Vader and Obi-Wan a little differently in terms of, I was thinking about this, if I tried to step onto a basketball court right now, I'd have all these great things in my mind that I tell myself I could do, and I would get out there and maybe be able to do 10% of those or 20% of those things at my age, right? Because I haven't practiced enough. I haven't been in practice enough to do those things, and I'm older. And so that's kind of the way I saw this fight with Vader and Obi-Wan, is that Obi-Wan's out of practice, right? He's denied using that. Who hasn't wielded a lightsaber in how many years? 12, 15, whatever it's supposed to be. And now all of a sudden he's got to take on someone who's probably been allegedly going around the galaxy hunting down Jedi and killing them, even though that little tidbit came up of we've helped many Jedi escape, which I still struggle with that comment. Just going back to the original trilogy, but whatever. Unless I get a Vader series where he hunts down Jedi. So, but with that, Vader's trained. He's been, using his craft the entire time, and I also love the idea that he just wants pure vengeance against Obi-Wan. It was going to be all about just torturing him and burning him and doing that to him, and the continuous argument of that's the Darth Vader we wanted, and we're getting it, and eventually it's Hayden Christensen, because I believe he was in the costume the entire time, and during the series, and we've talked about this before, and I'm going to bring it up again. Just his redemption arc as an actor, and him embracing the series, and the fans embracing him back, and all of us knowing it wasn't really his fault, in terms of how he was portrayed as an actor during the Star Wars movies, which I still think he did a great job. I think he was supposed to be this bratty, overconfident Jedi who entered into training way too late, like they were saying, but he's getting his redemption here, and that's the other piece of this that I truly love. I'm still not a fan of Reva, right? That's her name, Reva. I just don't. I don't know if it's the actress I don't like. I don't know if it's the character. I don't know if it's a combination of those. But I'm not a big fan.
To be
but
fair,
otherwise,
yeah,
that's just me. That's
to be
just
fair
me.
with Moses
In my opinion,
Ingram,
matters the most.
Right. To be fair with Moses Ingram, who's playing fifth sister, third sister, fifth brother. She's, I mean, if you look at her other credits, this is not like she has done period. She's done drama. So I think she's done stage. Like, entering into this requires, I mean, you have to kind of be in that headspace, I guess. Contrast her with Rupert Friend, who was actually, I think he was in the second Hitman movie. Timothy Oliphant was the first Hitman, and I think Rupert Friend ended up being the second one. Like, he is the Grand Inquisitor, and he knows exactly the right tone to set as, like, hissing serpent-like evil. And I think Moses Ingram, like, especially in those scenes together in the first couple of episodes, she wanted to build that vibe. Like, she wanted to coast off of that energy, and, like, and it may be coming across as a tad forced. Because again, if you're a more of a classically trained actor like Alec Guinness was, your tendency might be to go to play bigger, right? And sometimes I think, and this is why Ewan McGregor is so fantastic, is that if you don't play it big, then the moments that are big feel right. And so I think by the end of the show, I think I agree with you early that I didn't quite think she had the right voice for it. And I don't mean literally the voice, but like she wasn't able to articulate that character. But once we see ultimately, no spoilers, where Reva, fifth sister, like why she's even a part of this narrative, then I think I become a bit more forgiving, certainly more than Emperor Palpatine would be.
He's back. I don't know how, but he's back. Anyway, whatever. Yeah, we'll get to that eventually. I almost feel like it may be like she was overacting it. Maybe that was my issue. Again, I can't exactly put my finger on it, but I think you bring up a fantastic point about stepping into the moment, right? Because we all don't think just anyone can step into these roles. And I love that point. It's like you gotta feel it. You gotta feel that. Well,
and what's
the Force, which is all
Solo,
around us.
Yeah. Solo, a Star Wars story, like Woody Harrelson. If you said Woody Harrelson's in the new Star Wars movie, your first bet would be like, "Are you out of your mind?" But
well, that was my first thought.
Right, but he was absolutely letter perfect in that
yes.
role. like it just, yeah, some of it is just very easy. You know, like actors can, you know, and he was absolutely thumbs up in that role as Beckett.
We got to do a review of that movie because I just think it was marketed wrong. I think the reviews were way wrong on it, maybe because of part of the way it was marketed. Because Solo, I love that film. I think it's just that's a great Star Wars story, which is their whole idea behind those, right? Is just they're supposed to be these Star Wars stories that kind of get you to that point in the universe.
And that's really where Obi-Wan comes in too, this is a story of what he's doing all this time. You know, does he just live this hermit life, you know, not for nothing? Like when all this other stuff we know is going on around the galaxy, I think the honest answer is I don't think that there's a possible way that he just hermited up on Tatooine and didn't get involved. And that's where, you know, this show kind of came out of nowhere, I think, for some folks. And I know others who've reviewed it have said, you know, was this really necessary? Did we really need to know what happened? You know, but I think this show in episode 3 here especially kind of shows you, yeah, we did. There had to be something that ties these two together. And I think the argument really is, how does Obi-Wan eventually get the upper hand in A New Hope? Because we know, and I think the whole stomping on the clothes scene in the Death Star, we know Obi-Wan wasn't murdered. We know he didn't die. He just disappeared. And that was one thing I always, as a kid, remember thinking is like, well, he's not dead. Is he going to come back and be the hero? And I think I'm still waiting for that moment, right? I stick by, long ago, I explained why I feel Obi-Wan is the chosen one. And I stick by that statement. I think he is the catalyst that brings about balance of the Force. At the end of the day, when we get to that balance moment, it is all because of what Obi-Wan does. And I'm going to throw it out there that I think there is a way to resurrect Obi-Wan in the future and have him be the one who balances the Force in its finality. How you do that, I think you can debate. That's why I think it would have been great if Rey would have ended up being a Kenobi instead of a Palpatine. Spoiler alert. It would have been so much more impactful and such a much better story. But there's still more to come, shall we say. So, as far as part 3 goes, this epic meeting of the fates. Epic meeting of the fates in part 3. How do we rate this in a Kyber crystal setting? Lord Uther, I'm dying to know what you thought.
Well, excuse me. Seeing as it's a holiday season and I love putting up my tree and decorations way before Thanksgiving, because who doesn't? I give it a Grogu Christmas tree ornament green. There was some talking, you know, sometimes you see, just real quick aside here, sometimes you see these reels on Facebook or whatever of these actors talking, and Ewan McGregor was saying, I would have no problem coming back with Hayden Christensen and doing a quick run in a Clone Wars series as us during Clone Wars. So I don't know when that was from. It felt like it was recent, but maybe not. Who now, after seeing this series, which I know we're not to the end of the series yet, but we're going to see a few things, and then with Ahsoka, seeing Hayden Christensen back for that, wouldn't you be drooling as a Star Wars fan to see that? And I didn't even watch all the Clone Wars. And I can only imagine, and that was what was great about this episode, is we were getting a little bit of his shooting a blaster kind of style, a little bit of his fighting style, Obi-Wan's. And so I would love to see a run on that. And I'm sure there is a Clone Wars story somewhere in there that wasn't actually told in the series, and I'm sure Cillian Moss could probably fill us in on that. But I would be all about that. I think a lot of fans would. So anyway, Grogu green for the holidays, because again, who doesn't want their tree up at this time of year?
Gentlemen, I'm right there with Lord Uther. This is the Tiny Book of Grogu. It's a Grogu green, and it really is tiny. Like, if I pull this out and try to open it, I'll probably crack the spine. But it's definitely the holiday green, as you might have suspected from my ratings. Kyber crystals, Emerald City, full steam ahead.
And I'm going with the Green Bay Hunter Green today. This was easily one of the best episodes of any kind of Star Wars show I've ever watched. It had everything. It took it dark. This was the Empire Strikes Back of this series thus far for me. Rewatching this, it lost none of its magic. It was still fantastic. And it leaves you on a cliffhanger, which I always love in a show. And I love a good linear story that progresses over a miniseries. It's something that I kind of forgot about watching The Mandalorian, is that, you know, kind of hops around. You get a tale on a planet here, a tale on a planet there. It's not always direct connected, you know, arcing episodes. That's something that I feel like Obi-Wan really does just a fantastic job of doing, is building a straight linear storyline. Kudos to the writers of this episode, all 50 of them, because it was fantastic. So green Kyber crystals all around until we get back to that universe of Star Wars, that galaxy far, far away. I will say to all of you here at Pending Rebrand, like, subscribe, share, comment, and may the Force be with you always.